Okay, so let's get started. The Gemara yesterday was discussing the Shaila that Abaye sent, I think of Zeres, he sent him up to Israel to find out what the halach is with a liver. And he said, the Shaila that I have is if you cook a liver by itself, I have no Shaila, no problem. The liver, you can eat it because it's poilet, it's not boilet. Question is, if I cook a liver with something else, would it answer the things that you cooked together with it? And when when Reb Zera went up, he meant Reb Srika, and he said this is also not a shine because of the people who they fed. The Bereder of Shimon ben Pazi fed Reb Zrika and Yanai Bereder Abami the kana with all of the organs connected to it, which means the liver was there and the heart was there and the lungs were there. They were able to eat it all. Zok the Gemara, that's not necessarily a raya, because maybe the pikana was chutz l'ktera. Maybe the main windpipe was not inside the pot that hung over, and all the blood would go out through there and wouldn't go into any other organs. Inami, and this is the point that we're going to focus on today. Inami michlat havacholet le meikara. Maybe they plunged it into either hot water or vinegar that would have sealed in the liver so that it's no longer poilet. Rafuna would plunge the liver into vinegar, which would then stop it from being poilet. Rav Nachman chalti leberois. Now Tosfos asks, why would Rafuna and Rav Nachman be poilet? Obviously, they hold that in fact the blias of the liver, the dam would go out and impact whatever you cook with it. So why wasn't that gufa brought as a raya? You see, Rav Huna and Rav Nachman hold that cooking the liver with other meat will make the other meat also. Here we're looking for a raya. Why do we need a better raya than that? Zok Tosfos, the top Tosfos, im timer frek Tosfos, the tivshot mino, the osir, mida have a trichila mechut. Yeshlomer Zok Tosfos, the two nami have a mesaf. Maybe they had the same suffix as Abaye. They weren't sure. That's why they made this chaluta. The reason why they did this is because they weren't sure, so they wanted to play it safe. They only did this when they were cooking it together with other meat. So it shouldn't answer, the liver shouldn't answer the meat that's cooked with it. But if they cooked the liver by itself, they wouldn't have made this michlut before because there wouldn't have been an issue. Zokta heilige Gemara vat. Ki hader Afuna chalti lebechalev Rav Nachman chalti leberoischi. V'savar of Papa kamei de Rava lemeimar. Rav Papa had a havamina to say in front of Rava that when you plunge the liver into vinegar, up until the point where the vinegar does its thing and seals the liver, a little bit of blood does get absorbed into the vinegar. Therefore, Rav Papa thought that challah would be osir, the vinegar would be osir. Avalai Rava said, challah osir, if you're going to say that the challah is osir because it absorbed some of the dam, well then iyunami osir, it's going to go back and osir the liver. The same way the liver was poilet, it's going to be by life. We say that the liver is constantly being poilet, so therefore it's not by layah. So Rashi, it's not an issue because when is it not by leia while it's being pilot? Before they plunged it into vinegar. Once they plunge it into vinegar and it stops it from being pilot, now it's subject to being by leia. Gewaltig. Here we have an interesting story. Rav Bar Shava, Ikloi Levei Rav Nachman. He came to Rav Nachman's house. They brought him a liver that was cooked. Now, it was cooked, not stam. It doesn't say it was nifshal. It was cooked, meaning shlika means it was heavily cooked for a very long time. That's going to come to play in a minute. He didn't want to eat it. Overlay, they told him, Nachman, Barbe Rav de Lagav, your Talmud who came to visit, Lo Yochel was not trusting your hechsher. He's not eating your food. So Umani, and which particular guest do we mean? Rav Bar Shava. Omar Lahu, so Rav Nachman told his Talmidim, Omar Rav Nachman Gavel L'Shava, force him to eat it, force him. Hagmi Enu Bali Teyu L'Shava Al Korchai. Rav Nachman said, well, he's not eating for me, force him to eat it. Avada, what I'm giving him is a mutter to eat, and you could force him to eat it. Now the question is, why Taka did Rav Shava reject eating it? Zokt the Gemara Kitanoi. Let's say that there's a machloikas tanoim over. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, a covered oiseres v'einin oiseres. The covered will never become osir because it doesn't absorb. Mepnei shepailatas v'einu bailatas. But Rabbi Shmuel b'noish Rabbi Yechim b'breika Omer, that's not across the board. There are exceptions. Mituvelas oiseres, if it was really spiced up, that softens the liver and will allow it to be bite layam. And therefore, oiseres v'neseres, it will also become osir because it will absorb iser. Shluka, if it's heavily cooked, like it was in this case, oiseres v'neseres. So the reason why Shava didn't want to eat it is because he was subscribing to the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel, but no Rabbi Yechim and Broika, yet Rabbi Nachman held he should still eat it. Rabbi Barafuna, iklo lebei Rabbi Barav Nach. Aisila kamei. Savi tachoy. This has nothing to do with our sugya. They brought him a very big delicacy to eat. It was bread that was beautiful white bread that was smeared with oil and honey. It was a very big delicacy. Amanu, he told him, Mi hava yadisu dasina. I didn't make a reservation. I surprised you. I popped in. How did you know that I was coming, that you went so out of your way to prepare such a beautiful meal? They told him, I'm glad that you think that it's for you, but we had no idea that you were coming and we didn't prepare this for you. You think you're better than Shabbos? It was Shabbos that he came. We never prepared it for you. We prepared it to cover Shabbos. You were lucky you came on Shabbos where we prepared it for Shabbos. So don't be under any false illusions that we made a special preparation for you. At the Hachi, he's there by the house, and they served him another thing. They brought him a liver that not only was the liver cooked, but it had in its pipes, in its arteries that were going through the liver, there was regular contained blood, which you're not allowed to eat. And we know the halacha is really you're supposed to kind of chesed the earth and drain it out. The Mishnah told us if you didn't, even after you cook it, you could do that. So he said, Avada, it's kosher, you can eat it because we can take the blood out now. But why wouldn't you have prepared it properly? They told him, so what is called preparing it properly? What would you have expected us to do? You should have put a slice in it, horizontal or vertical, and then when you roast it, you should have roasted with the opening pointing down, so while you're roasting it, all the blood would have drained out. You'd only have to do this when you're roasting a liver. But if you were roasting the spleen, which also is very red, and you might think that it has blood in it as well that has to be drained, you're wrong. Because that's just fat, and there's no concern whatsoever about getting at any blood. Shmuel used to always make himself a dish of spleen on the day where he would have hakozas hadam. He needed extra energy, so he felt that spleen would give him the extra nourishment that he would need. Itmar. Kveda iluya bisra. If you're roasting on the same spit, liver with meat, so you should position it where the liver is above the meat. Kveda iluya bisra. It would be mutter, even if you position it that way. Either blood from the liver will be running down on the meat below it, because doma mishrik sharik. Blood has a property where it just bounces off. It's almost like it's a Scotch guarded item that it bounces off and goes down. It won't get absorbed into the meat as it's running out of the liver over the meat. But chala ilu yibisra. But if you had a khal, which is the udder with milk in it, that you're not allowed to put on the spit above the meat. Also, my taima chalav seruche misra. Milk doesn't have the property of dam, and it does adhere. And we're afraid it will become nivla in the meat and it will aser the meat. Now Rashi explains that in those days, their pits, their ovens were like pits, and the spits were vertically placed. So if you put a spit in an oven with multiple things, like a big shish kebab, it would be vertical. So one would be above, one would be below. Rashi tells us nowadays our ovens are much wider open and our spits are put in horizontally, which means that you'd always have a problem because you don't know if it's exactly level, can move up, can move down, and therefore you might have a problem with the kvede liyabisra or the kachla liyabisra. On the other hand, Rav Dimi Minado said the opposite. Masni kachli liyabisra shari, my time, kol shuta derabana. The cholov that comes out of the udders internally, that's only Rosh Rabbanan anyway. So there we're not worried. But Kaveda Iluya Bisra, but the liver over the meat, also because dam is the irais. Dam is the irais. Therefore we're more mach. Okay. Now Tosfos does point out a couple of different things. First of all, Tosfos points out the Rabbeinu Tam learned that this whole sugya was speaking lakula because he said that the dam of the kaved is only osamidu rabbanan anyway. So according to Rabbeinu Tam, it's a little bit schwer to understand. The Gemara is saying that dam is daraisa. But at the bottom, Tosfos asks, "Vim toimar chal heich muter tu sebisra." How could you eat a chal even if it's below? Right? We said if the chal is on top, the milk might aser the meat below it, or if there are abundance, I won't aser. But if you put the chal under the meat, you still have a problem. The shamnunas of the basar on top will drip on the chal below, and the milk in the chal will get the taste of that meat, and there there'll be a problem. And if you prepared it by cutting it up and squeezing the milk out, so then it should be mutter on top. At that point, you know how to cook it. So surely you should have to roast it. Here it's worse. The aval pisha karoi, even though you cut it already open, if you put the chal on top of the basar, yes, you cut it, but the milk is still draining out. Viniker, you'll actually see the white droplets coming out and going into the meat. That's a problem. But when you're cooking, even though there's some milk in the water, you don't see it, so we're not machbar. If you did all the necessary prep, the muter levashlo in basar b'kteira, you'd be able to cook it with basar in a pot. We don't find anybody arguing. It says beferish that if you cook, if you roasted the chal under the meat, it will be muter. Even though the shamnunis of the basar above is dripping down on the top. Zok Tosfos weiter, umashin sorin shalai lachter kachal riseh v'sakmin shal basar. That if they have a regular cooked or roasted chal, you don't cut it with a fleshig knife. Minik shall hevelu. It's completely nonsensical minik. Even Here, even if they're cooked on the same spit, there's no problem here. And even if you put the kal on top, it's only lechatchilu the asar mitam deprecious, but the evid would be shot. So therefore, once you have a cooked kal, there's no issue with cutting it even with a fleishig knife, provided that it was prepared properly for bishul. Zok the Gemara weiter. Darsh Merim. Hilchasa, the halacha is ben kveda ben kchala, tuse bisra, shari, ilu bisra, the eved in lechatchila. The liver and the kal, if it's on a vertical spit, make sure it's below the meat. Rashi says, Hilchasa, uladidon asul legaber. Rashi always likes to paskin in Chullin. According to us, it's also legaber lechatchila, because our shpudim, the shpudim shalonu einon tluyin el shoichvot, upa'amim shemerim zonu v'ashpud, v'nimtza tachton elyon, upa'amim shemashpiloi, v'nimtza chaver elyon. So therefore, we shouldn't ever even roast a liver and meat or a challah meat, because since lechatchila you can't put the challah, the liver on top, and if you have a horizontal shvud, that's going to be very hard to monitor because it has to be perfectly level or perfectly sloped in the other direction. Therefore, we ask you lechatchila. I would not allow anyone who asked me to roast a chal and a piece of meat on the same spit. Rabashi ikla levei Rami bar Abba chamua. Rabbi Ashi came to his father-in-law's house. He saw his brother-in-law, the kashofit, he was roasting on a spit. Let's turn over the daf. The kashofit kvede liyibris. He was doing what we just said, that lechatchila should not be done. Omar, he said, who do you think you are? Kama yor haimer rabona. Who do you think you are that you could just ignore concern that the dam of the kaveh will answer the meat underneath it? Excuse me. Even though we know it's mutter for the eved, Eimer domer rabbanon the eved, but lechatchila we know lechatchila you're not allowed to roast that way. The ikaveh dugi. What if you wanted to capture the juices, the gravy that runs off these meats that are being roasted? So if you have such a pan underneath, bisra iluya kveda namiyosh, then it doesn't make a difference what position the basar is. Lagabi the kaveh, the gravy down there will be usher because there everything got mixed together. Frankly, Gemara, if you're worried everything got mixed together, so forget a case where you have kaveh and meat roasting on the same spit. What if you have two pieces of meat on the same spit? There's going to be dam coming out of the basar too. So maishnomi dama the bisra, weiter in the pan there'll be blood that ran out of this meat that's going to mix with the fat and the gravy. So there should also not be allowed. Why dafki if there's a liver involved, do you say the dam from the liver will cause a problem? So Dr. Moore, because there's a difference. Dama de bisra shach. You know what happens when you have fat and blood of a piece of meat? What's going to happen is they're going to separate. The fat's going to rise to the top. The blood's going to stay at the bottom. So you could just skim the fat off the top, and then you could use that fat as gravy, and you won't have to be concerned that there'll be blood mixed into it. But dama de chvei coffee, the dam of the liver actually will float together with the gravy, and they won't separate. So it'll be impossible to separate. That's why we only have a concern placing this pan to capture everything when there's a liver involved, not when there's meat involved. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, sakin sheshachat ba. What have you shechted with a sakin? Now we know the base hashchita is reiseach, so the sakin would have been possibly by leah some shamnunis. It might even have shamnunis be'en on it. So therefore, aser lachtach bar reiseach. You're not allowed to cut hot meat with it. Zok Rashi, sakin sheshachat ba. ID the base of shchita reisach. About the base of shchita is warm. Boileya hasakin min adam. The sakin will be bileya from the dam of the shchita, and therefore the osher lachtach bor reisach. You're not allowed to cut a hot piece of meat with it. If the shechayzer poiled boy is going to be poiled that dam into the other hot meat that you cut. But soinin to cut cold meat, amri law boyadocha, v'amri law boyadocha. Could be it requires just a rinse off if dam got on it, but could be it doesn't even need that at all. Amr Rabbi Yehuda, Amr Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Kaira Shemalach Babosher. This is an extremely Yosydistic Gemara that we're going to learn now. The famous sugya of Nat Parnat. Kaira Shemalach Babosher. If you have a pan in which you salted meat, now meat is considered a dover roisayach because meliach roisayach. So that means the tam of the bosor, the tam of the dam, got absorbed into the keli. So therefore, if you now wash this keli out, and now you want to serve on it a hot, sizzling steak, also lechel boy roisayach. You cannot eat resech. Why? Because there's dam that's nivla into this keli, and when you put hot meat on it, that hot meat is going to be by leia some of that dam, and it will be awesome. Zog to Gemara. Now, it might not all be awesome. You might just need klipa, but it will create a problem for you. Okay, weiter. Ushmul temei damer shmul meliach hareu koresech. Shmuel holds meliach is koresech v'kavush hareu kavavush. He also Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan. When Ravin came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that there's no such thing. Meliach eina koresech v'kavush eina kavavushal, and you sure can use a plate that you salted meat on. You can surely use it to put hot meat on. There's no issue. Amar Abaye Hadu Ravin lesson. Ravin is simply mistaken. No such thing. Rabbi Yochanan never said meliach eina koresech. And I could prove it. Ta'i Pincha. Pincha is a kaira shel cheres, so there's no way to kasher. The Hava Bei Rav Ami, it was in the household of Rav Ami. The Malach Bei Bisra, they would salt meat with it, the Tavre, and the Rav Ami broke it. Why did he break it? Because he held obviously Melich Harisech, and it would be Poileya from Isser. Michti. Rav Ami Talmud Rabbi Yochanan. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan. My time at Tavre. If you hold Melich as if you hold like Ravin that Rabbi Yochanan said Melich is Av Koresech, why would Rav Ami have broken? Lav mishum the Shmiele mined Rabbi Yochanan the Omer Melich Hareu Koresech. He must have heard from Rabbi Yochanan that Melich is Koresech, and therefore Ravin is simply wrong. Now, you could ask a simple question. Why not? Why break it? Just save it, and you'll only use it for cold, or you'll only use it to make melicha on. Why did he actually have to break it? So that's a discussion. Most of the Rishonim explain that he was concerned having such a keli around just in case somebody would use it with him. Yosy Rav Kahana, Achud Rav Yehuda, Hamed Rav. Rav Kahana, the brother of Rav Yehuda, was sitting in front of Rav Yehuda. The Yosy Mikavama, Kaira Shemalach Babos, a Kaira tray in which you salted basar, also lechal bar resayach. You're not allowed to use that for hot, just like we said earlier. Utznoin shachatchay besakin. What about a radish, which is very sharp? If you cut it with a knife that was a fleshig knife, Rashi says utznoin shachatchay besakin. Avagab agav chorfed utznoin. You're cutting with it a sharp vegetable. Who boileya mishamnunis hasakin akarishin. The shamnunis of this sakin, we're talking about the chalaf that has shamnunis from the shchita. The balti radish is very sharp, even though it's not hot. That will cause the radish to suck in and absorb some shamnunis, which means the radish is not fleshings. Now the high tznoin nesinas tam rishon. This tznoin was boileya directly from meat, from actual shamnunis that was on the knife. So now you have a tznoin that's like meat. Zokt Rav Huna, muter lechle bekutach. You're allowed to eat it with kutach. That's fair. Kutach has milk in it. How can you eat a radish that has bilias of meat with kutach? My time, and the reason is Omer Abaye hayetera bola v'hayisur bola. The tznoin is not a problem because it was boiled meat. Meat's not iser, so therefore you can eat it with the kutach. But the shamnunis of iser of dam that the tzakin put into the tznoin, that would be a problem. I'm sorry, the kairish shemalach babasar would be a problem because there's mamish dam. Dam is also. Frank the Gemara, that doesn't make sense. Amalei Rava, Kibola Hatera Mahava. Soif Hai Hatera, the Osil de Yisuru, the Yisuraka. What's the difference if it was Berleia meat of Isser, of Heter? The bottom line, if you're going to eat it together with milk, it's going to become Isser. So there's no reason to be mattered. So therefore, it will be awesome. El Omar Rava, I'll tell you what Rav Huna really meant. What he meant was you can eat it with kutach under a specific circumstance. If you mitigate the problem of fleishing. What does that mean? You taste the tznoin, and if you could taste basar in the tznoin, then it would be asur to eat with kutach. But if you couldn't detect any taste of basar in the tznoin, then it would be mutter to eat with kutach. And that's what Rav Huna meant. He meant if you tasted it and there was no taste. Frek the Gemara, high mitame. The high life shall mitame. But you can't taste the meat that you put onto a plate that was salted to see if it absorbed, because it's dam. You could taste something to see if it has a meat flavor, but you can't taste something to see if it has a dam flavor because dam is also. So get a goisha taster to taste it. Milat nan didn't we learn? Keder shabishal babosor loyivashal b'cholo v'mbishal b'noishin tam bishal b'truma loyivashal b'chulin but v'mbishal b'noishin tam v'yamrinan, and we asked on the Mishnah bishlema truma toim lakain. Truma you could taste, you can have a coin tasting. Alabasa b'cholav matarmli. Who's going to taste that? Well, Omar alone, and he told us l'tamek kvela. Get a goyisha cook to taste it. So who had to know over here too? Hachanami l'tamek kvela. So why did you say that by the tznoin is mutter and by the dam it's not mutter? But the dam you can also get a taste. Hanami kikamina like a kvela. I just mean if you don't have a kvela around and you have to rely on your own tasting, we have a solution for the tznoin, but we don't have a solution for the kaira shemolach babos. Now it's important to note that all of these kairos that we're talking about, it doesn't mean if it was a rack and the dam just drained down. There you wouldn't say the rack was brelea. It's only a problem. It's only a problem if it's a keli without holes, so actually the salt water builds up at the bottom. Now Tosfos has a long discussion. We'll have to get to a different day. Why aren't you worried? Never mind when you're salting meat and liver. Even if you're salting meat and meat, the lower meat should absorb down from the upper meat. So that's a discussion we'll have to have a little bit later. Now we're going to get to this Yosy sugya of not by not. Itmar we learned. Dagim shalu b'kaira. What if you have a plate that you cooked meat in, and now you just took this plate you just cooked meat in it, but it's clean, and you just took fish off of the barbecue. You have hot, fresh, roasted fish, and you put it on this fleishika plate. Dagim shalu b'kaira. Now, what's unique about this? Because it was never boilea directly from meat. The meat, the blias of the meat went into the plate, and from the plate, it will go in to the fish. That's called not by not, because there's no direct basar, tam of basar going in to the fish. So Zok to Gemara, Dogam Shalu B'Kaira, Rav Omer Osol Ochlam B'Kutach. You're not allowed to eat them with kutach. Even though it's an indirect type of flavoring, it's enough that it asers the fish to be eaten with milchus. Shmuel Amar Mutter Lachlam B'Kutach. Shmuel Al Mutter, who we paskel. Rav Amar also because nois and tamu. There's still a flavor of the meat in the fish. Shmuel Amar muter nois and tam bar nois and tamu. It's a secondary tam, and that's not going to us. But Rav love beferish itmar. Rav didn't say beferish that nois and tam is aser. Elamechlala itmar. It's from a story that we saw this was his opinion. To Rav Ikla Lebei Rav Simi Bar Chia Bar Barei, Rav showed up to his grandchild, Rav Simi Bar Chia, Chosh Beina, and he had an ailment in his eye. So they made for him Aldulay Shaifa Bitzah. They made him a very sharp type of ointment in a plate. Basar Hachi. After they cleaned the ointment out of that plate, they served Rav his dinner in that plate. Time with the shayfa. And when he ate it, this wasn't a question of Isha Heter, but when he ate the food on the plate, he actually tasted some of the ointment. Omar Rav said, wow, your time of kula high. So you see, Rav holds that it does give a tam, even though there's no shred of shayfa left, but it was on the plate, and the plate absorbed it. That will now go into, even though it's a secondary tam, it will go into the food that you place on it later. But from that story, you can't bring a right. Shiny awesome the nafish merarat fei. Shaifa is very, very bitter. Its flavor might carry through. But you don't have a right from this story that a regular piece of meat its tam would go into the keli and then go into fish. You don't have such a right. Rashi says, even though you don't have a right from Rav did say, Befair somewhere, that not by not is awesome. Rabbi Lazar have a kohen kamei de Mar Shmuel. Rabbi Lazar was standing in front of Mar Shmuel. They brought him such fish that was hot roasted, put onto a clean plate that was used prior for fleshik, and he ate it with kuta. Yoiv lay, they gave some to Rabbi Lazar, and he didn't want to eat. Omer lay, so Shmuel told Rabbi Lazar, I gave it to Rav, and he ate it, and you're not going to eat it? And now this is interesting, because we just learned that Rav said you're not allowed to eat it. Yet Shmuel just told his Talmud Rabbi Lazar that Rav did eat it. Now Rabbi Lazar wanted a double check. Also, like I made the Rav. Rabbi Lazar went to Rav. Amalei asked him, is it true what Shmuel told me? Were you chayzer? Do you now agree that not is mutter? It's chas v'sholom that the children of Shmuel's grandfather, who were so erlich, the less that would feed me something that I don't need. In other words, of course I hold it's awesome, and I maintain that it's awesome. So the Rishonim struggle. Would Shmuel have lied? Where did Shmuel get his information from? So it's possible that Shmuel saw something that Rav did that he misinterpreted to thinking that it wouldn't be a problem. L'moshel, maybe it was maybe it was in a benyoimai, maybe there were other mitigating factors there. But Shmuel thought that Rav was chayzer, but in fact Rav was not chayzer. Rav Huna v'Rab Chia bar Ashi have a Yosy chad b'hagisa de maver de surah b'chad b'hagisa de maver. They were both on the opposite sides of the river. Lamar Isulay, for one of these Talmidei Chachamim, was brought to them dogim olu b'kaira v'achal b'kutach, like Shmuel's kula that not by not is mutter. Lamar Isulay te'enim v'nova b'sech hasuda, where we normally hold the balt is not part of the suda, you have to make a special bracha. Yet v'achal v'loy barach, and he didn't bench. So each one had tiniest on the guy on the other side of the river. Mar one told his friend, Yasma, Yosy, you have no guidance. Would you ever do that? Yasma, they both did not approve of what their friend did on the other side of the river. But they both had an answer. The person who ate not by not said, I hold like Shmuel, who hold there's no problem. And the one who didn't make the bracha on these pairs in the middle of the Suda, the Tanya Reb Chia passed by Teres called Mine Maichel, the Yayin Poiter called Mine Mashkin, and therefore I don't have to make a bracha, even though these pairs are not relative to the Suda at all. Like Shmuel Paskin, And if you cut a radish with a knife that was fleishiks, that's also lo'echle bekuta. What's the difference? It's also not by not. It's not getting directly a taste of meat. It's getting the blia of meat that's in the knife. Teretz is that's only something sharp like a radish. You bought it sharp like a radish. So to Gemara, the agav churfe pola. If it's very sharp, it will be baile. Now Rashi actually gives two reasons why agav churfe pola makes a difference. In one pshat, he says that since it's very sharp, it'll suck out more mamoshes, more tam than just if you cook it together. And the other svar was, let me see where Rashi's inside. We'll have to pick up on this tomorrow. The other svar that Rashi said was could be there's actually real mamoshes on the knife, but you didn't notice it. It's a thin residue of shamnunis. Maybe it's mamish getting a tam not from the bli in the knife, but from the residue that's on the surface of the knife. That's not by not anymore. Second shot, Rashi says, side sharp, and side you're putting pressure by cutting it, so therefore that would make the blias go in much stronger into the tznoin, and therefore it would in fact be a problem. Now it's a little bit late, but we have to discuss this sugi of not pernat because it's something that we encounter every day. It's such a common shaila. You ask the Rav, I by mistake cooked lokshin in a fleishik pot, and I wanted to make lokshin and cheese. I want to make macaroni and cheese. Can I use it with cheese? So this is a very common shaila. Rashi had an interesting case because the Gemara's direct case is where you just had dogim that you placed on a plate. That's where Shmuel says not as much. But what if Tosfos discusses the case where I cooked an egg in a fleishig pot? I cooked the egg in a milchig pot. What if I cooked an egg in a milchig pot? So it's also not, but it's coming through the water, and when the water cooks, it sucks out more. Zokt Rashi over there. Rashi had such a shaila. Tosfos quotes that Rashi paskined in a case where you cooked eggs in the milchig pot, you wouldn't be able to use those eggs as ingredients to make a fleishig knish. Why? Because he held it would be like tznoin chechot besakin. What did Rashi say? Since it's harif, it does suck more blias out. Well, if you're mamish cooking it, it's not just sitting in a pot. Maybe it would suck blias out. Now we don't pack like Rashi, and there's a long Tosfos here that we'll discuss more tomorrow. That says that even though you cooked it, wouldn't be a problem. But that's very relevant because that's exactly the case we have. You had a fleishig pot in which you cooked macaroni. Can you use this macaroni with cheese? According to Rashi, that psak that he said about the egg, you wouldn't be able to. According to Tosfos, you would be able to because even though you cook it, it's sucking more blias out. It would still have the heter of not burning. Okay, let's stop here, and then the Hashem will be mamshus tomorrow.